Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. I am so excited to be your guide as we travel back over a millennium to explore the very foundations of the language we are speaking right now. Today we are diving into the Forge of English, a deep dive into the Anglo-Saxon Age. Think of this as the origin story for the English race. We'll be tracing our lineage from the fall of the Roman Empire all the way to the Norman conquest. Let's begin our journey. Take a look at this incredible helmet on your screen. It represents a world of courage, savagery, and splendor. This era, which we call the Anglo-Saxon Age, spans roughly 600 years. We're going to see how the fall of Rome paved the way for a brand new culture and literature to take root in Britain. Imagine Britain in the early 400s. The Roman legions who had protected the land for centuries have packed up and left, creating a massive power vacuum. Into this gap step three Germanic tribes, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Historical sources describe these settlers as fearless, adventurous, and brave. They weren't just visiting, they were looking for a permanent home. By 670 AD, they occupied most of the country, establishing Angloland, the permanent abode we now know as England. Now, if you heard these settlers speak, you wouldn't recognize it as English. Their language was a fusion of Germanic roots with small traces of Latin and Celtic. Look at the text on the slide. Huar, we gardena ignerdegum. To our modern ears, it sounds like a foreign code that requires translation. But make no mistake, this is the bedrock of our modern tongue. It was a language used for complex riddles, puzzles, and massive epics. Before there were books, there was the human voice. The Anglo-Saxons were singers, not writers. In the great halls, people gathered to hear songs about battles, gods, and ancestral heroes. This was the true beginning of English poetry. Because it was sung rather than written, very few remnants exist today. What we do have are the greatest hits that were finally written down on parchment by monks centuries later. You can't talk about this era without mentioning Beowulf. It is our first English epic poem and the most famous artifact of the age. It tells the story of a brave Swedish hero who travels to Denmark to defeat a terrifying monster. Even though it's set in Scandinavia, it served as a vital bridge between the settlers' old Germanic roots and their new English identity. It's a classic tale of courage, loyalty, and the struggle against darkness. Not all poetry was about monsters. We also see a deep melancholy of the sea. Take the poem The Seafarer. It's an anonymous 124-line narrative of an old sailor looking back on his life. He talks about the cold, the danger, and the loneliness of the waves. It perfectly captures the duality of the sea, how it can be both bewitchingly fascinating and unpredictably dark. Here's a wonderful word for your vocabulary, uchtkare. It means lying awake in the morning worrying. We see this in The Wife's Lament, a raw 53-line expression of grief from a woman whose husband has been exiled. It shows us that beneath their warrior exterior, this culture dealt with deep anxiety and sentiment. Eventually, the culture shifted as the Anglo-Saxons embraced Christianity. Poets began mixing their old warrior style with Christian ideals. A great example is the Dream of the Rood, where the rood means cross. In a very bold move, the poet has the cross itself speak to tell the story of the crucifixion. This was perhaps the very first successful English literary export. Let's meet our first named writers. Caedmon was a humble goatherd who composed Caedmon's Hymn in the 7th century, the oldest known poem written in English. Bede, known as the Scholar, gave us Bede's Death Song. Legend says he composed this 5-line lyric on his deathbed, reflecting on a life well lived. Next is Cynewulf, one of the few poets who actually signed his work. But he didn't just write his name, he wove his signature into the text using runes, ancient Germanic letters. His work, like the poem Christ, shows how religious themes had come to dominate Anglo-Saxon poetry by this time. In the 9th century, King Alfred the Great changed everything. He realized his people needed education in their own language. He replaced Latin prose with English, following the rules of ordinary speech. His masterpiece was the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a timeline of the nation that remains one of the most important historical manuscripts ever created. Following Alfred's lead was Alfric, a priest and the second most famous prose writer of the era. He wrote Lives of the Saints and even a grammar. He was famous for a specific style that made complex theological ideas easy and alliterative, making them accessible to the average listener. All things must come to an end. The Anglo-Saxon period flourished until the Norman conquest of 1066. The last Saxon king, Harold, was defeated by William the Conqueror. This event marked the definitive end of the political era and shifted the linguistic and cultural trajectory of England forever. So what was the spirit of these people? They lived lives rich in courage, splendor, savagery, and sentiment. Their culture was built on 5 core principles: love of personal freedom, responsiveness to nature, appreciation for womanhood, the struggle for glory, and deep religious conviction. To wrap up our lesson, remember that even though their political rule ended 1,000 years ago, the Anglo-Saxons remain the ancestors of the English race. Their Old English, forged through migration, war, and faith, is the foundation of the language we are using today. The voices of the warrior, the exile, and the believer still echo in everything